Good. Hello, my name is Farrell D. Moore, and I'm going to interview our new aspiring author, which we've just signed at Whitecap Publications, Tawnya Torres. And how are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Good, good, good. Thank you. Let's see. We've got a lot of questions to ask you, but first, I should mention the name of your book that may be publishing. It's A Silent Discovery. It's a fantasy and romance novel. You've also written a science fiction and romance novel. And the third one would be more of a suspense.
Yeah, like a domestic suspense
Yep. Yep.
and psychological thriller with some like speculative elements in there.
That's a lot of categories jammed in one, right?
Yeah. I'm just trying to break the mold, you know.
Well, you're doing a good job, I must say.
Oh, well, thank you.
First, Tanya, the first question is, when did you first realize that you wanted to be a writer?
Well, I kind of always have like written, but didn't take it very seriously until I lost my job for the second time in November 2020 due to COVID. And at that point, I hadn't worked for 4.5 months, and then I wasn't going to work again for another 4.5 months. And I was like, kind of going through this phase of like, well, who am I? What do I want to do? I don't work all the time. And I went back to doing art, and I was kind of shabby at it because I would do it all the time when I was young.
Right.
And then as you get older, you have responsibilities. You can't do that all the time. And so
Yes.
trying to reconnect, like I started painting with acrylic and I was not good at that. And then I found that watercolors were a better medium.
Oh, really?
And then I started short stories to kind of, I was doing EMDR therapy. And so I would write down kind of like these visions that I would get in the therapy. And then they became full-length novels, and it kind of just took off from there.
That's great, actually. Who would you say, another question that's out of the blue, but who would you say were the authors that made the most impression on you?
Oh, so I love Chuck Palahniuk. I feel like all his stories are really wildly weird and absurd, but they have such a voice to them. Like you always know, like I could probably pick up one blindfolded and know exactly who wrote it, but that's always going to be different. So I feel like I picked up Fight Club when I was 15, and I never read anything like that before, and I just thought it was amazing. And Alice Hoffman, I've always loved her work. Like I read her as her YA, when I was a teenager, and as I got older, I started reading the other books. And I always kind of just liked that she made magic seem real, that it wasn't too like high fantasy. It was just like that magic could exist within our world in a way.
That's a good point, actually, Tanya. That's a good point. How long does it take you to write a book?
So anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months. I usually try to just kind of like push through it and have a rough draft done. I try not to take longer than 4 months, or I feel like I'm never going to complete the project. So I really I remember reading like a thing from Stephen King where he's like, if you don't finish your rough draft in 3 months, it's not worth it. So I try to just push myself to get it all on the paper, even if it's really bad. I'm like, I'll get to that later, just have it on the paper is what I think is important.
Right, right. That's a good point, right? What is your work schedule like when you're writing?
So I bartend at night. So I usually try to write like a little bit before my shift, but I tend to feel more creative at night. So sometimes I'm typing at like 3 or 4 in the morning.
Really? Yeah, I'm the same way, actually. What would you say is your most interesting writing quirk?
Well, I write in present tense, which I guess is kind of unusual. And then besides the silent discovery, most of my books are written from the point of view of men.
Really? Yeah, I think the first person singular is making a comeback, but sort of not. But you write it very well. You write it very well. Now, where do you get your information or ideas for your books?
So when I'm doing a fantasy novel, I try to do something like that I haven't seen before. So I use a lot of Asian or Middle Eastern like lore, legends, stuff like that. And then when I was writing my science fiction novel, I was watching a lot of Joe Rogan, Elon Musk podcast and learning about the technology and the advancements that Elon Musk wanted to make, because I wanted the science to be rooted in reality. And so I kind of looked at what he was doing in like the scientific world for my information.
Well, that's a great idea, actually. I mean, what does your family think of your writing, by the way?
I think that they like it. My mom has read some, my sister-in-law has read one. I read all my stories to my boyfriend before I share them with anyone. Some of my cousins have read them. My brother and my dad don't read so much. They'll probably just wait for it to be a movie.
What does your boyfriend think of your writing?
He thinks that it's great. So I started like, since I was using it like to kind of like deal with trauma, like I didn't think about writing a story to deal with trauma. And he was like, it
Right?
just improves your mood and it just seems like you're happier. And it's like entertaining for him. Like he'll kind of come up to me sometimes now when I'm typing and he'll be like, are you almost done? And I'm like, let me finish my art.
Oh my gosh, that's funny. Now, what was one of the most surprising things you learned in creating your books?
That it could be so healing. Like I used to think that writing would be like, just for fun, or maybe you're trying to like make a point. But when I was transcribing sort of these like EMDR visions and making scenes and then putting them into full length books, I found that it was like I'm discovering a lot about myself and kind of having more patience with other people. I guess that's I was so in the mind of other characters that I started to see the world in a different way. And it had
Really?
a positive effect on like my mood and just dealing with things. Like I found that I was more patient and
Right. Did you ever consider your writing a chore?
I think that when I was younger, like I think I was like, I just want to be a writer so bad. And then I would sit at the computer and try to grind and it wasn't happening for me. And so it used to feel like work and now it just happens very easily for me.
Now, you've written 3 books, but have you written any other ones?
I have 3 others and one that I have just started. I have a new story. My very first one I haven't like shared with anyone. That's like one of the ones where I'm like I tuck it far away from the world, deep in the
Yep.
laptop for no one to
Yep.
see.
Yep. All right. Do you have any suggestions to help a beginning writer become a better writer? If so, what are they?
I would say don't limit yourself. And if you feel like you have to break a rule to write a certain story, I would say break that rule.
That's good advice.
But try to, if you're going to break the rule, break it consistently and try to do it stylistically so that it doesn't come out sloppy.
Wow, that's really good advice. Now, what do you think makes a good story?
I like stories that are very cerebral and make me think. Like I want to, after I'm finished with the book, like I like to sit there for like 2 days and just really be thinking about the concept and what happened and all the feelings
To
that I felt.
digest everything, so to speak?
Yeah, like if I close a book and I don't feel anything and I don't think about it, I'm like, oh, I just felt like that wasn't a good story. It's like after I
Yes.
finished reading like White Oleander or The Virgin Suicides, I just like laid in bed and I thought about it like all night that night.
That's really a natural talent. So, what is the most difficult part of your writing process?
Probably going through the second draft and editing, uh, like snipping out parts that don't need to be there. I just find it endlessly boring, but it's a necessary evil.
Well, that's good. Now, how long have you been writing, or when did you start?
Well, I wrote mostly for school. I always got like really good grades on my essays and short stories, but I didn't take writing novels or like my writing like for personal gain seriously until about a year ago.
Right, right. Let me circle back to your most difficult part of your writing process. To repeat those, what did you say they were?
Oh, just like the second draft, going through like editing,
Right,
taking out parts that don't need to be there, kind of like figuring out what works for that story. Cause a lot of
right,
times, like I told you, I kind of just put it down on the paper within like a certain amount of time. And then I go through
right.
it and I'm like, what is this? And I try to find like the voice in that story and take out all the things that aren't like adding to the voice.
I see. I see. All right. What advice would you give to a writer working on their first book again?
It's okay if it's not perfect. Just show up for yourself. Be disciplined, get it on the paper, have your
Well,
finished product before you really judge it.
that is really true. I mean, honestly, so many people start and stop because they feel that the story isn't good enough or they're not good enough. They get distracted too easy. But I think an important part of that is just discipline, right?
Yeah, like showing up for the work and for yourself and having confidence in yourself. Like
Oh,
I
that's
feel like
right.
anytime you're like, oh, this isn't going to be very good. I don't know if I can pull this off. I think that that's like when people want to give up. And I would say just like, even if it's really bad, finish it
Yes.
before you judge it.
Now, to you, what are the most important elements of good writing?
I think the point of view And
Oh, really?
yeah, like I think that like the point of view has like a great effect on the story as a whole.
Right. Right. Now, what comes first for you, the plot or the characters, and why?
Definitely the characters. I usually kind of have like a main character because if I don't care about the character, then I don't care about the story.
That's a good
Story's
idea.
kind of like second to what's going on with the person.
I think that's true, right? How do you, when did you first call yourself a writer? I mean, you started writing about it seriously about a year ago. Do you consider yourself a writer?
Um, I didn't really tell people that I was a writer maybe until like a couple months ago because it just felt so like, all like, I hadn't really shared with a lot of people. I hadn't been like published or anything. So I was like, I don't know. I felt kind of embarrassed about it, I guess. Like I was like, am I a
Mm,
writer? Am I an imposter?
kind of surreal,
Yeah.
and none. But now that you're published, soon to be published, The Silent Discovery, how do you feel about it now?
It still doesn't feel real because I saw this like in a vision. And I'm like, is this really happening?
All right, I've got another question for you, a last question. But I hope we can do these interviews weekly.
Yeah, that sounds
So, I
good.
mean, we'll go into your books a little bit more, what they're about and everything like that, what people can expect from you as an author. But how would you use, do you use social media a lot? How would you use social media as an author, do you think?
So I have been kind of documenting just like, what I've been doing as like an
Right,
aspiring writer, like, like what books I'm working on, kind of like a little
right.
blurb, maybe what it's about to see, what people think about it. And then I just kind of been documenting like, like this is where I'm at, this is how many no's I've gotten, how many maybes I've gotten.
Do you document on Facebook or Twitter or
On Facebook mostly.
Facebook mostly? You find that you have a large following on Facebook?
I didn't really think I did until recently, where all of a sudden I was getting like over 100 likes, whereas before I had like maybe like 16 of them. But
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe it's kind of like people like to root for the underdog. So,
I think they do a lot, especially a talented underdog like yourself.
oh well, thank you.
Yes. All right. That concludes today's interview. And the channel is Right. And the publisher is Whitecap Publications. And their author, Tawnya Torres. Could you tell us what your Facebook address are, your Twitter address, and
Oh,
do
so
you
on
have a
Facebook,
blog, by the way?
what's that?
You have a blog? I mean, a website?
I don't have a website. I was actually thinking about asking one of my friends that
Yeah.
makes those about. I was like, oh, now I can have business cards and a website and be a
It's
real writer, a
definitely,
genuine
yes,
artist.
it's definitely advantageous to have a website. Now, but how can people get a hold of you at Facebook?
Oh, so you can just look me up, just my name spelt the way it is, Tawnya Torres. I think that my URL is Tanyasian Persuasion.
Okay. And do you have a Twitter address?
I don't have a Twitter currently. I was thinking about now being more active, maybe on TikTok and Twitter and stuff like that.
Oh, TikTok is great. And Twitter is great too. I mean, they're really great. Facebook is the best, but for aspiring authors, but yeah, I think that's good. So, all right. Let's see. We'll see you next week, Tawnya.
All right, I look forward to it.
Until then, interview it right. So goodbye till next week, right?
All right, until next week.
Bye.